Why do studios tend to crunch? Like, why does the game industry run into this problem over and over again? I mean, why does any creative industry run into this problem? I heard even one of my favorite animated shows and films, the Spider-Verse series, had a lot of their own run-ins as well. And I think they pushed it. Oh my gosh, my throat. I haven't been talking really for the last few hours, just been working. um, have been running into their own challenges. They're going to like release in like 2007 or 2027. They're going to go back in time and release the project. So why do projects tend to crunch? Now, this is a couple suspicions of mine. None of this is law, meaning just because what I say and what I've seen and what I've heard, even if there's a lot of merits and a lot of evidence to prove that there's a lot of what I'm saying, there's a lot of truth to what I'm saying, doesn't mean that it is entirely true for every studio. It doesn't mean that there is malicious behavior either. I think this is actually one of the biggest things that might catch people off guard. And then also that that people have figured out a better way. You know, I have no clue what is the best approach for any given project unless I work on that given project, know who I'm working with and how they work, and kind of deadlines and the project style, all that stuff matters. And I try my best to prevent any and all crunch, but it is by design almost impossible to avoid any crunch, unless you are already like raking in lots of dough as a company, and you're kind of just cranking out a project that is pretty similar to the last project you made. Then there might be less and less of that. But I think even in those circumstances, you'll still see crunch. So what is crunch? Let's just define it for those of you who are just like, what are you talking about? Like crunch cereal? No, no, no. So crunch is just a simple like overworking. You know, you have this project, you have this idea for a video game, movie, TV show, whatever, and you have all of these great individuals, usually artists, usually 3D artists, to be very clear, people who crunch the most in the art field. Animators and anyone who's working on the more technical brute force you need to get shit done, basically production. So if they clocked in at 9, they clock out at 9 type of thing. Like this is a lot of work, 12-hour days plus. There are some studios that are notorious for 16, even 18-hour work days for long consecutive time. Not like, oh, here's like a month of really crazy work because we're about to push this out for our milestones or we're shipping the game. No, this is like 6 to 8 months of this. And, you know, we may still have a few years before we actually ship the game out. I disagree that this is appropriate. There are some really amazing games that have been made under these types of circumstances. And so there's a lot of potential perspective like that feel like this is merited then, because look, like it works. This to me feels a lot more like, you know, you have a square hole with like a like oblong peg, you know, that you're trying to shove into that square hole, and it just doesn't really fit. You know what I mean? Like it is wait, hold on, I'm trying to find which lines are the real lines. This ones are. It is um a devastating process that eventually you like crack the hole by just cramming it in. You know, I'll have this tagline whenever I get a new opportunity as an art director. One of the first things I kind of tell people is that I have this suspicion that people aren't as creatively responsible as they ought to be. and that nobody admits that we don't really know what the hell we're doing half the time. People will act and posture as if they know, but a lot of the time, we just don't know. And it requires a lot of experimentation. And sometimes that experimentation needs to be treated with a lot more respect. And honestly, again, this isn't simple. Like, even if you do that, and there are teams that may do this, they do like R&D sessions, then you have to create other kinds of guardrails to help you understand what is even possible with the team that you even have. But anyway, this is overwork. Like, crunch is basically overworking. Okay. And it is one of those things that is plaguing our industry for a couple reasons, right? So I mentioned, just kind of foreshadowed a bit about creative responsibility. So let me kind of step a couple steps back before I get into that. But one of the first things I will say that I think tends to happen is that a lot of artists, especially, they actually love what they do. You know, there's a love-hate relationship, but there's definitely a love for what we do, you know? And even as we speak, like when I do my own personal stuff, sometimes I'm like up till late in the evening. So there's this kind of like bad habit that we automatically already kind of instill in ourselves, at least the vast majority of us, or a good amount of us. And the people that tend to get really good at what they do tend to work a lot anyway. And as a consequence, that's kind of like built to our like standard of behavior. Like the 9 to 9 is kind of what we do, right? Or even before we start to work. So part of the problem in some instances is that we already have this kind of mentality in this type of vibe of like grind, work. I have done my part to try to teach people to be smarter and more effective with their time. There are great books like Deep Work, which teaches you how to focus your time better. Like, for instance, if you have your smartphone like on your lap or near you and you can hear it and it chimes and vibrates, like that might disrupt you every 5 to 10 minutes if you're at your most productive, you know, let alone if you're not productive and you're interrupted by it by every 10 seconds. But let's say you're being a little more productive, even if it interrupts you every 15, 20 minutes, it's interrupting you. And there's this kind of flow that you're losing focus. But if you're super focused, you gather all your references, you gather all your materials, and then you just do the work for a few hours, no interruptions. You might get so much more done you doing that versus just letting time fly and not being aggressively focused. But that's a talk for a different day. So this can happen. Again, this is one of few reasons, maybe even several, but I'm just going to go over a couple that I normally see. So the individual, like us artists, tend to work really hard outside of work, usually. And as a product, I think this gets exploited by companies. And I'm using the word exploited just because I feel like that's the best way to describe it. But I don't mean that they're like actively aware of this and like like having maniacally twiddling their fingers together. I think that they just like, if you're working a little bit later, cool, man, you know. And what ends up happening then, which this is one I think is probably more important to focus on, is mismanagement. Okay. Now this one I think makes a big difference, right? And probably is one of the biggest things. And I'm numbering these, but honestly, it doesn't need to be numbered. I'm just kind of describing what I see. And again, there could be more, but there's a few of them that I just want to focus on because I want to make sure I can get this video out in a reasonable time. And I want to do a bit of a demo. So mismanagement is another one of those things that could happen. And what I think comes from mismanagement is multiple factors. I actually don't think that it's just the top tier upper management, we'll just call them and then, like, you know, you have your staff, like basically the production, and then you have like, leadership, like your leads and what have you. Like this is where art directors, and all that kind of like general managers and people like that. This is where your staff, like people like the actual people who create the bulk majority of content, and then you have your leadership who usually runs sidestep to these people, but they have connections to these people more directly, right? So you create this. We can actually write lead. So you have this kind of triangle of development, and mismanagement is just as described, right? And I think that a lot of times this group gets an unreasonable amount of criticism. I don't think that there is no criticism to be had. Absolutely. I think that a lot of it is actually very warranted, but I don't think that it's scaled appropriately. And at the end of the day, just to be quite frank, the buck ends with them. I think that they are truly the ones who need to kind of make really good decisions and try to understand kind of the circumstances that the project's in, and to be able to communicate that effectively and help try to deliver effectively. But I think what ends up happening though, which creates this like effect where they become someone people almost rile against, even the outside, like you have gamers or basically audience, right? Then they start to look at this too, but they usually go right past these other developers. Sometimes gamers will generalize and say game developers, like every single one of them. But there is definitely some weight that should be responsible more than others. And I think upper management definitely deserves some of that kind of responsibility and that kind of criticism from like that level. But as I begin to jump into these different, so I've been in all these positions. I've been here, I've been here, I've been here, and I've seen what happens, and I've heard, and I've talked to, and I've managed, and I've realized that mismanagement goes all the way around. Okay. And upper management has to do a better job, in my opinion, trying to communicate their concerns and challenges honestly and ethically to the people that are subordinate to them, because these people are the meat and potato. They're going to help move the machine, and it's really reasonable to understand their concerns, but also lay out to them honestly the larger concerns and the challenges that you're trying to overcome, and that you're all at the end of the day in the same boat, and if any department fails at what they do, including the upper management, obviously, then the boat sinks, And so mismanagement can look like a lot of things. And I'll give you a couple descriptions of what I've seen. For one, like upper management might come with a very soft request of like, hey, track your time and effort. And this is like, I think, pretty reasonable. So people over here will track their time and effort. We will start to write on tasks and how long we think it will take, all these types of things, right? So this is all pretty reasonable. But let's say that they don't deliver on 2 of the 3, and this person doesn't deliver on 1 of the 3. Okay. So the upper management takes a look at this and can only really try to understand what could have happened here. So either this person overestimated how much work they did or they could do and underperformed, or that these tasks are misdiagnosed. And this is true for this person. This is even true for upper management. It's true for everybody in this problem. But I'm going to use this kind of example. And this is where I say this shit's fucking complicated. Okay? Because you might look at this and say, like, so if you're upper management, and you some of those of you who are actually upper management people, other directors might look at this and be like, yeah, I've seen this, right? And people who are like, junior level can probably still understand, this doesn't look good. So maybe we be a little bit more critical of this person, right? But in reality, let me give you some examples within this context that it doesn't paint the full picture. And this is what I've discovered over and over again. So let's say they didn't accomplish these tasks, but let's say the task was like create a couple props here. And then let's say this task was like create like a biome. And then let's say this one, so this one's a little bit larger task. And then let's say this one was some level design stuff. I don't know, right? So then when you look at this, you might be like, oh, but I thought we could do all this stuff. But level design is a pretty big ticket. And within level design could be all sorts of secondary tickets. And even when people write these could be also miscategorized and overwhelming, you know? And all of a sudden, you start to realize that the design team keeps giving too many notes too frequently. That threw this person off, that then threw this person off. This is where it becomes incredibly weird. And so when you're like one of the leads is in a room just with this person, not experiencing all of what this person goes, and let's just say this person too isn't like a strong communicator. There's nothing wrong with that, right? This is probably why they're in the production line, you know, and they're probably happy with it. They're happy just making cool shit. They don't really care to talk and interact with others, and they're incredibly skilled with their stuff. I mean, obviously they will interact and chat on a friendly basis, but they're not here to like lead the charge. That's what the leads are. That's what the directors are for. And so, dude, this gets wild very quickly. You can imagine, like, look at all this stuff, right? And then you didn't even realize there was another vector. And then design might be getting a lot of pressure from upper management. And there's another person outside of this, which is the publishers or the people who are funding the project, you know. And then the publishers have like their stakeholders. And I think there's less sympathy for this a lot of the time. And again, maybe a conversation for another day on my opinions on what this is like. But this is like crazy. This is very hard to manage. And so when I say it's mismanaged, what I don't mean is that everybody's an idiot and incompetent at what they do. I'm saying that they don't respect at the scale of how hard this is just to manage in general. I've always made the argument that there should be multiple directors in every department. So there's like a singular art director. Okay, I think that's okay. But maybe that one art director could be the visual development art director, meaning that they are almost specifically focused on vibes, like the artistic vision. And then there should be like art direct managers who are like people who help the art director like with the visual development, but they also help the art production and make sure that goes smoothly. So they kind of are like the one that lives in the middle, but they have just as much sway and understanding. Like I find myself actually very good at that position. Like somebody who can help manage teams of artists, not necessarily only provide visual artistry. But I would say I'd prefer having, even if I was, let's say, the visual development side, I would still want like a partner in crime to run the show with me. You know what I mean? Because there's just so much stuff to worry about. If you have the art director only worried about production and they are an incredible painter, designer, visual creator, but they're like living in spreadsheets because they're trying to run the production and they're like sweating bullets because like things are falling apart. And that's not a skill in which they have been training their entire career to get good at. Dude, this shit gets wild very quickly, you know? And it's like having your star quarterback, like playing assistant coach. You see what I'm getting at? Like it's a mess. And this isn't just, I can only speak with the art direction with some authority, but I see this in all of the other disciplines, you know? And so you have a lot of this mismanagement, misunderstanding of what each individual task. I remember I had a producer complain to me like, hey, this one artist keeps like missing their stuff. And I'm like, let me look at what they did. And it was like one of these. This is why I'm like telling you, like this hits home. This is a great example because I investigated and I was like, oh, bro, like these independently are incredibly challenging. And they were going under the assumption that this would have been handled, but there is a lot of design meetings. And for what it's worth, They should be. Honestly, there should be a lot of iteration on design. We should be having those conversations. Absolutely. But because of that, they were bottlenecked, and because of that, they couldn't do these things. But honestly, that's not the best way to approach this. I was suggesting, why don't we do something where we, instead of just doing quote unquote gray boxing, right, where it's just living in level design, like let's teach the environment team to make gray box environment assets. So instead of making boxes, they actually make trees, but they're like Nintendo 64 looking trees, you know? They're like super low poly, but it looks like a fucking tree. And instead of like boxes, like we'll make low poly barrels. Like I can make a barrel. You just open a blender, make a cylinder, put an edge loop here and whiten it. Now it looks like a barrel, and ship it out, put it into the game engine, you know? And what this will allow is, like, instead of making super, super simple boxes, we'll let the level design, like the environment artist who's helping on level design, create actual assets. So they're kind of getting a blurry, unblurred version of what could be the props, what could be the biome, but solving this problem at the same time. Because we should be iterating. This is what matters in a video game. We should be trying to make a fun ass game. But we cannot let the artists just hang back and wait either. Like we have them on staff, we're paying them for their expertise, we need them to start to help out some way. And ironically, doing it that way, what I saw allowed the design teams like, oh, that's a tree, so they start to feel differently about the environment, and those feelings help drive the design, and then the design drives the feeling of the art, and it's this beautiful song and dance that I think is a much more effective way to make levels than to just kind of do this like step-by-step approach, right? Work all together. And this, for what it's worth, is an incredibly hard thing to convince people of. But until you start doing it, they're like, holy shit, this is the way. Because we're not saying we know that tree should be a tree. It might end up becoming like a badass sci-fi column that releases like drone spores because we realize that's a cool idea. But we're living in like design world and ideas, and the artists are using their skills to help inspire the team of designers, you know? Because we didn't know that would have been that. We thought it could be a tree, but then somebody's like, oh, what if it was like fucking spawning drones? Because we're playing the game and we're like finding that it's fun, that something else could happen here, versus just a box trying to find the perfect layout of an environment. This is incredibly challenging and only works typically when you already have a relatively rigid formula, I found. Like you've already delivered a high level AAA game and you have a team of people and you just want to kind of have an even more efficient chain of events, like block workflow, or step-by-step workflow. But in a lot of the studios who are especially trying to make their own projects, this to me feels like such a dangerous strat. But this is what I'm getting at. Like look at how just this one vector alone, I'm only looking at the staff, right? I'm only looking at them because I think this is rarely looked at. But I'm telling you that even they don't know sometimes how long it might take them to do something. Hold on, I gotta turn on the AC. I can feel my laptop catching on fire. I'll try to record this. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, I mean, listen, leadership can also have problems. There's a game of telephone that can happen. I mean, it starts way over here even. The publisher might say something, you know, and then the upper management passes it on to lead, and then the lead passes it on to their staff. And then even within the staff, they might communicate differently. Even if everyone's in the room, you know, and you say a word, right? That word can mean multiple things to different people. And you might think to yourself, how is this possible? Like, there's just no way that people would get confused with a single word. When you hear the word traditional, think to yourself what you think this means. Right? You already might be asking, well, context to say traditional art. What do you think that means? This is a real example that I encountered where half of the room, which were non-artists, heard the word traditional, and they thought, like, think of like Renaissance paintings. And not just like the way that it was painted. Because if you're an artist listening to me, which is an art channel, you're already probably thought, oh, like painting with oils and acrylics and what have you. I already know that you're thinking that. These people meant like the classical themes of those Renaissance paintings of just like people in courtyards and like the stuff that they were doing in the medievalness of it all, right? Of that like early century England, right? Oh, sorry, early century Europe. And you might have been like, well, that was not on my mind. I was literally thinking like grabbing some oils and pastels. This is what I mean. So in the meeting, people said, yeah, we want this to feel more traditional. That's what the designer said. And then the art team was like, okay, cool. So you wanted to make it look more oil and all like this. And we were like, oh, no. Like it feels more traditional, like these paintings here. And they were showing like Renaissance paintings. And we were like, and the other artists were like, oh, yeah, that's painted with oil. See, this is what I'm getting at. Like this gets wild. So if you're just writing this stuff down and you don't have somebody who's trying to like understand what people are actually meaning, you run into this challenge pretty aggressively and pretty often. And I found that, again, where the buck stops, people need to be good at defining the terms within the project as often and as humanly possible. Because this is everybody speaking the same language. Imagine you have a team of people where somebody, like English is not their first language. And this is what I constantly see, is this mismanagement. And because it's mismanaged, they just let people work longer hours because they just aren't able to try to capture it. And sometimes it just takes more and more time to just do it. So you have like this combination of people who are passionate what they do, and then they think they're on the right track, but it's been mismanaged, and then they end up working a little harder. And then this is when you get the crunch that we all hate. So you go months, maybe even years, but definitely months, like a full 3 to 4 months of just going down this path of mismanagement and misdirection and the misunderstanding. You start to create a lot of professional resentment. And this is incredibly problematic. And then you see a milestone. It's like an event, like, hey, there's going to be an event coming up, or we need to deliver a milestone to a publisher. And it's like, holy buckets. We got only 1 month to deliver this thing, whatever this is. This could be name any big thing that you think matters to showcase this, right? It could be anything. It could be an event like E3. It could be an award show. It can be literally early access release, patch update, you name it. And then the state of the game or the project right here is in shambles. The pipelines that were put together is a mess. Okay. And now you're like, we got 1 month to make this happen. And that's when you see people working 12 hours minimum every day for an entire month. And then once they get through this, usually they do, especially if you have a hardworking group of talented individuals, we somehow always find a way to pull out of our ass. Then there's another one. And now we only have 2 months. And then there's another one. Now we only have 1 month again. And it's like this constant. And you never fix the management problems because now, and sometimes there's this grace period where this maybe not months, it's years of just free creativity. And then when the rubber hits the road, it's too late, it feels like, to really come back and figure out workflows. And I have seen this time and time and time again. When I look at the game industry, film industry, TV shows, whatever, I'm convinced that nobody really knows how to really capture the lightning in the bottle. It is incredibly challenging, and it takes a lot of effort, a lot of experimenting, and a lot of being wrong in the worst ways, and then trying to overcome them. Whoever survives those tend to be the ones who can stick around and at least bathe in the glory of the project. Maybe not financially. Unfortunately, a lot of production artists don't. But at least they can say they worked on something fucking awesome. And this is what leads to crunch again, and why a lot of artists will say that they do not want it, still do it, because again, like, we love to just do it, but it feels bad when it feels like it's been mismanaged. But then it's mismanaged because it's like you're asking artists to task their goals, and some of them are just not that person, and they are unsure. You know, it took me like 2 to 3 years of like speed painting to know how long it could take me to do a painting. I could do most paintings with some good success within an hour. You know, especially if it's like robotics, dark fantasy, and horror. You know, I have a good like gauge on how long that can take. And working with lots of artists and learning a lot of different programs and understanding how to use them, it allowed me to be able to look at some of these artists and understand their challenges, because I've been there. I've walked that walk, even just for a little bit. It allows me to give some perspective and some authority, because like, I'm not brushing them off their concerns, and I can reveal to them some of their management challenges on their own end, because whatever you feed the machine will regurgitate back at you. And this isn't always the case. I actually want to be very clear. There aren't always just superhero upper management people who are working with people that don't know how to make tasks and whatever. And there isn't like leads that don't know how to lead. This is not what I'm trying to get across. There are definitely people who are incredibly terrible managers, because they're just bad managers. Like, it's not about mismanagement. Mismanagement comes with bad management. I'm saying even when you have good managers, it could still be mismanaged. This is what I'm getting at, right? And you have to embrace that mismanagement can and will almost certainly happen, right? Bad management is like, yeah, you get this for free, but you get a lot of other stuff. You get a lot of resentment immediately, and you get a lot of bad taste in people's mouths. But with at least good management, people might not hate their managers, but they'll hate the process. They'll hate game dev, you know, because of this cycle here. And they're unsure where to point it. So usually if there's good management that people love, then they'll point the fingers on any external factor, like publishers and the stakeholders and I think there's reasonable critiques even at that level, but I won't get there for this video. Just kind of want to focus on why people crunch. And so you have all of this stuff happen. And this is where I coined the term creative responsibility. What is creative responsibility? Have you ever heard, well, before I go into that, let me take only one step back and then we'll jump right back into it. So crunch tends to happen mainly, I think, because of stuff like mismanagement and the pressures of the outside world. That'll probably be like the third thing. It's like outside forces, you know, not OnlyFans, outside forces. That will be kind of the main culprit. And then why it's usually exploited, because if people like in the construction workers know they're working overtime, like they feel immediately pissed if they're working overtime, because, and again, I don't want to make this seem like artists don't feel this way either. Let me just paint this picture for you. Like, if I already don't like my job and now you're asking me to stay another hour, you know, then I'm going to be pissed. But if I love my job, I might work the extra hour or two. So an 8-hour day might look like a 9 to 10 hour day, but you didn't tell me to do that. I just did it. I just did it on my own volition. But then we need to work overtime because of these deadlines. So what would normally those extra 2 hours are now considered the norm. So there's 9 to 10 hour workday. So now we're adding another 2-3 hours to that. This is typically the problem. This is what I mean by it's exploited. And this is why I actually sometimes, I remember I had one of my artists post something on our Slack at like 10 p.m. And I said, hey, listen, don't post anything after work hours. If you're working after hours, I can't stop you. I don't want you to. So if you feel like you had to work and then post it at 10, Okay, sure, but I could have waited till the morning. You know, I'm like literally telling artists to stop working because I'm trying to create a better baseline for them to work under. You know, I want them to work within the 7 to 8 hour mark. I don't want them to work beyond that. If they can't do it within the 7 hours, then we as an upper management team need to decide what kind of game are we trying to make here and what do we have to make sacrifices on. Do we need to hire more people? Do we even have budget for that? We don't. Okay, then maybe we need to reconsider what our limitations actually are. You feel me? This is the heart of how I like to manage stuff, and this is where now I'll come back to creative creative responsibility, and I'm going to be painting for the next 10 minutes or so. So, creative responsibility to me, simply put, is to respect that this is like an incredibly wild thing to do, making a creative project. It is it is one of those things that's just like, how do we even do it, right? Like, how do we even get away with making anything impressive? I always try to say, like, look at like how artists talk about art, right? We talk about it like it's an expression. It's like a commentary about our feelings about the world. I saw this interview um, because things are being heavily politicized these days. And Green Day, one of my favorite punk bands, had this commentary about being, political, and that they were always political. And they made a point of like, if you have something to say politically, then if you're going to write a song about politics, it should be the same way you would write a song about love. Like, it usually comes from some truth. And I thought that was super tight perspective. I was like, damn, it's tight. So think about that. Like, that's like art, right? That's like creating a TV show, creating a movie. Like, some of the most successful movies, some of the most successful projects come from a place that matters. Like, it means something to people, you know? And trying to capture that with hundreds of people, other people, like, that's crazy to me. Dozens of other people, that's still intense. Like, I have a close group of friends that I love dearly, and I can say with confidence, like, a third of them, we disagree almost on so many things, you know? But yet we're so close because of some of the principal ideas of what we care about are strong, you know? But yeah, some of these other things, if we were to try to make a project around some of the topics that we disagree on, um, it might actually have a lot of value because of the nuance of it, probably, you know? But that would be just as hard as trying to convince my parents to think differently than they've been thinking for the last 60, 70 years of their life, you know? And I think, to me, like, when you try to build an interesting project about, like, let's say like a video game, like a first person shooter, everybody has their own opinions of what they think a good first person shooter should be. Then you have artists on that team who have their opinions of what they think good art in a first person shooter should be, you know? And I talk about, like, people who are, the staff, as if they don't have any say. Like, no, I respect a lot of what they say, because I think you want to try to find that gradation where everyone kind of sits on the same stand together, because that's how you're going to be able to get over the hump. If you have too much dissent, like everybody disagrees with every aspect of what you're trying to make, then it's just going to be such a turbulent project to work on. And I've seen those environments, you know? And it's okay if you have a few people here and there, but then that's where you have to be creatively responsible. You have to understand that some people might not be on board with what's being made creatively, and you have to be able to convince them what the vision is. And if they understand what the vision is, then their critiques should be more strategic. If I'm saying, hey, we're making like kind of like a hard skilled first person shooter like Counter-Strike, and a lot of their feedback describes like what they love about games like Fortnite, you know, we have to be able to question that, context as a team. It's like, well, what is it specifically that you're trying to put into Fortnite, into this project? And they might be like, the base building is really interesting. I love it. It's a really great way to kind of like mix up the action. And to say, okay, so perhaps what they're critiquing is that the action right now feels a little predictable, and they're only bringing up Fortnite to try to find a way to make it less predictable. Maybe that's a better way to parse that critique. What we're not going to do is put, building mechanics in the strategical shooter, because that's not the kind of game we're making. But we should consider that breakthrough that Fortnite might have came across as a result. And then the person who gave that feedback needs to be able to hear that kind of like rebuttal and be able to be like, yeah, you know what, maybe that is what it is. Let me sit on that. And then they will probably like, hey, well, what if instead of base building, like there are like control points that you can do something, and then those control points allow the player to maybe access weapons again. They can purchase, because in Counter-Strike you can only really buy them once or pick up from fallen enemies. So maybe that's a fun way to kind of mix it up, So maybe you couldn't get the M16 because you're broke, but then you killed somebody. Now you can either pick up from their body, or you can like cash in like a storage box or something. I don't know. This is where you start to live in the same lane when you're talking about feedback. And this is like, I find, a great tool to be creatively responsible. But let me be very clear here. Even the way I described how those solutions could be, and how like we in this hypothetical, the people in this gave a rebuttal against the one person who said about Fortnite, what I'm also trying to say, that person might also still be right. They might be right. We might, like, for whatever reason, our game, even though it started off as a Counter-Strike clone, it's just beginning to reveal itself that it might be more of a Fortnite clone for whatever reason. And that the early development sold this idea that it was Counter-Strike, but the more that we're playing it, and this guy or gal just had a nose for like saying, I think this is more like Fortnite, but it doesn't know how to have a good way of explaining this. Might have hit it on the money, but then if people are like dismissive, like this isn't Fortnite, that is not being creatively responsible. You rebut what they're trying to critique, not how they're critiquing it. I mean, unless they're being like really rude, then yes, you can critique the critique. but this is what I'm trying to say. Like, embrace that people are trying to figure this out, and we're unsure as a collective. And as much as the designers might have written in law that this is what the game ought to be, it might not be the case, dudes. It might not be the case. This is why I think also, to be creatively responsible, playtesting and constant revisions is the only real way to find the truth sooner. And I phrase it that way, sooner. Not find the truth like immediately or instantly. Like you do a couple prototypes, and then you know what the kind of game you're making. No. It just will help. There's many other factors that must come into effect. There's something that I think people also over-index in, which is like something called a game design doc. I think this is by far one of the most largest sabotages to a project I've ever seen. You're already preordaining what the game is going to be and why it's fun before even playing it. This is Looney Tunes, And any of those people who are working in the business and who've worked with game design docs, who are listening to me talk right now, if you guys can tell me and write in the comments of a project where you started from a very clearly written game design. Again, the game has not been made. It's never been made before. There's no example of this game before. A perfectly written game design doc. And then that game design doc was the final product. If that is you, tell me what game that was and what studio. I would love to know. Because I am telling you my personal and professional experience. I just don't think it's been done. Especially in video games. Maybe in other games, like analog games and stuff like this. I don't know. Could be. but I have not met anybody. Like when I tell people this, they're like, yeah, me neither. And many of you guys will probably be like, I mean, there might be one person that will say it. And that's why I'm like, dude, please tell me what, where, and when, how, because I need to get more of that data. I need to understand what they did differently. And they might have just gotten lucky, you know? They may have just gotten lucky. Maybe it was a game jam. That could be it too. Something about low stakes quality could prove high quality games, but it is far and few between. The large game studios that I've worked on, this is almost consistently true. There's never been a situation where they had a perfectly well drawn out game design doc that had all the answers and it followed through. Most great games, including the example I just brought up, Fortnite, started off one way and then evolved over time. Fortnite, as we see it, is an evolution of a version of Fortnite that was also evolved from a different version of Fortnite. It's just how it is. And again, because at some point, eventually, people are being aggressively prototyping and playtesting their game, which allows them to start to see the cracks in the code. And for me, when I make this claim, I am saying being creative responsible. I am not saying that I too have hold all the answers, that I have figured it out. I am just embracing that it has not been figured out. And the only real approach is the approach that I've seen work for my art, help me improve in my skills as an artist, which is just good old fashioned iteration, good old fashioned trial and error, like good old fashioned scientific method. Have a hypothesis, test it against, or first research your question, like, is there a game like this? What have they done? You know, then have a hypothesis of what you think that is. And you could be a loose prototype idea or a loose game design doc. I think that's okay, with the idea that your game design doc will be evaporated as soon as you start to actually prototype. You know, but you go and begin to test that hypothesis against experiments, and those experiments are the prototypes, the playtesting, and you just rinse and repeat, and eventually the truth will reveal itself. Eventually, your game will tell you what it wants to be, and it might not be fun. Just like a painting that I do, sometimes I'll start off with something, and 10 minutes into it, I realize it's no good. I work and paint quickly for a reason, so I can find out sooner rather than later that what I'm working on is not worth finishing. And so I tend to make a couple of decisions at that point. I either restart my entire painting, right? Or I make huge changes to it to adapt to my new perspective of what I would rather have go on with this image, you know? That's typically how I approach a situation like that, where I just decided I don't like what I'm making. I either make huge changes, or I will, I'll either make huge changes, or I'll just restart. And that usually works out for me. Yeah, all right, let me think about this design. I actually like where this is going. I didn't anticipate it to go this far, to be honest. But I like it. Let me think what else I can do with this to make this pretty cool. Oh, there's like this white. So let me put like a little rabbit on here. I don't know how to paint rabbits. I saw a picture of a rabbit the other day. So I'm gonna just do this. I saw a picture of a rabbit, so I'm gonna draw a rabbit now. That's how I design. It's like a cat rabbit. I'm into it though. Yeah, and so what ends up happening with a project can like happen the way I just described it, like where you you had this really cool idea for a video game, and then you put it out there, or you start working on it, and you start to really get it close to a finish, and you start to realize it's no good. And either people make a huge change to the project, or they make a completely different video game. A good example of this is like Project Titan and Overwatch. Overwatch was originally this entirely different game, and it just wasn't going well. So they completely scrapped it in about a year. They essentially asset flipped a lot of the original game idea that they had, but it was such a huge makeover in terms of game design. It really isn't recognizable to the original game that they were aiming for, but there were pieces of what the original game was doing that they really liked. There was like some part of the game that they were like, "This is pretty cool. Let's just make this the game," you know. But I wouldn't consider that a big change. I would consider that a complete redo. But then a game like Fortnite is a good example of a rechange, like a big change. I mean, right? Because a lot of the game, like the building mechanics, the third person view, like a lot of the destructive environment, the art style, like a lot of stuff stayed. They just made a huge change that the battle royale aspect of it is more the meat of the game than anything else, which was a wise choice, obviously. And there's plenty of examples of other projects and games. If you watch any like behind the scenes making of, it almost always is like that. Like we originally had this idea, and then we changed our idea. Like that is just par for the course of like all of these types of projects. This is what I'm trying to get at. And I think that a lot, like I made a video about the grass is always greener. I think a lot of people who are outside of the industry think like, well, if I was in there, I would show them how it's done. Or like, don't they know like how they like to make a video game? Like just make it easy or just make a good game. Duh. And making a good game is incredibly challenging, and I am shocked that they even get made as frequently as they do. You know, that's why I think the indie space tends to make a lot more consistent bangers, but not because I think indie developers are just better. I think that indie developers have a couple things in their favor. One, numbers. There are far, far more people making indie games, so the likelihood of bangers is just so much higher. And two, lack of risks and like external forces typically. You know, usually some of these like behind these people who just come out of nowhere, they didn't have any real large overhanging publishers constantly creatively challenging them, and or their own development team and process overwhelming them. Some of them don't know any better, and as a result don't realize what not to do, and that helps them make potential bangers. But to think that the indie space alone is the solution here, I think is also a little bit naive. There's a lot to it. I think the fact that they don't have to manage large teams prevents them from having mismanagement challenges, because there are great examples of some of these indie studios that got just a bit bigger, and then they run into mismanagement, and they run into all the same challenges that a triple A studio or double A studio runs into, because it's just a consistent challenge, you know. But yeah, I think by pure numbers and lack of external forces constantly pushing onto the needle or pushing on the sword into their heart, really gives them that advantage. But AAA has the advantage of brand identity usually, or team identity. Like Bungie just released a lot of amazing trailers for their new game, Marathon. Looks super cool. There's like a cinematic video done by a bud of mine, only through acquaintances. I don't want to make it seem like we're best friends. Alberto Miego. He's incredibly skilled visionary and made that shit look incredibly visual. Just obviously. I don't know how else to describe it. And I was already in. I was like, yeah, this looks super cool. We'll see if I play the game. But the visuals made me want to play it. You know, I was like, ooh, maybe. And so this is the kind of part where I will say that I don't get mad a lot of the times at studios who make some of the decisions I think a lot of gamers get mad about. A lot of gamers get very, very upset and very reasonably upset and also unreasonably upset at a lot of different projects. And I think when you start to make your own project, like there's some good YouTubers that I've seen who there's one YouTuber I really like. His name is Mark Brown. He started making his own video game, and he never had this kind of shallow perspective of game development. I think he always absolutely respected it. But I think he also probably had this sense of like, maybe I can do it. Like I have all this really good insight. I put these videos, essays about game development, and they do really well. So there's a sense of confidence that I believe that he deserved to think that he had. But even with that, even when I'm telling you, even I think I'm pretty good at some of the stuff. Once you start doing it, you're like, damn, man, this is so hard. This is so hard for all sorts of reasons. And I only laid out like some of the most biggest ones. And the ones that I think are the easiest ways to fix things is to try to mitigate people's ability to work 10 hours, even when you're not crunching. And then also mismanagement, like bring that down to a minimum and expect it and work around it as a team collectively. Don't expect there isn't mismanagement. This is the mistake I'm really outlining here. Again, creatively responsible. Respect that being creative requires a bit of you step away from your painting, you look at it from afar, and you ask yourself, is it any good? You got to do that often with your projects. And so, yeah, I love that he did it, because once you start to do it, he was even like saying, yeah, I spent like months not doing anything because I just didn't want to, and he was being very honest. And he had that avoidance behavior that's very common in these types of projects, and it's very common, very, very common. And I respected him even more because he didn't acknowledge that he would know how to do this. He actually probably began to have more sympathy for development, and I'm sure he's working on game 2 or game 3 or whatever, or game 2 probably. Maybe not. Maybe he's put it up the reins. Who knows? We'll see. Give it some time. But I bet that game is going to be even better if he does decide to do it, because he's got that experience now, and he's begun to realize some of these challenges that I think a lot of people encounter. But it's hard to describe. It's truly hard to describe. And this is my best way to describe it. Hopefully you guys get some understanding out of this. So when you get hired, if you're on a junior level, and if you want to show a lot of value, yeah, demonstrate that you respect a lot of these challenges. Try to quantify your worth and your time. Like, find out how long it actually takes you to do stuff. And if you get something wrong, or if you start to notice that some of the timelines you thought you were doing were wrong, then be more conservative next time. Like if you said, hey, I can do this in 2 weeks, say you can do it in 4 weeks, literally double the time. And that will help you be more reliable. Because if you're in those meetings and you say it takes me this long, and you're being honest with them, like you think so, and they're like, okay, well, shoot, we might have to work around the budget. And if they're like, hey, look, like we want it sooner though, is there any wiggle room here? Then you need to start to learn how to kind of negotiate that time effectively. So that way, what you don't want to do is to be like, okay, we're not even crunching yet, and we're already kind of pushing ourselves too much. You don't want to like be a thorn in anyone's side just yet. You want to just kind of like say, well, maybe I can do this or this or that or this. And it's a good compromise that you don't think are compromising the quality of what you need to deliver. You could deliver on time and demonstrate that you are willing to work with the challenges, because they might not be telling you. They might be saying this and you might be like, this is unreasonable. But they might just got a call last night and the stakeholders says, if we don't see anything of value in 2 months, we're shutting the studio down. And a lot of managers just won't say that. And rightfully so. I think that can kind of cause a bit of a panic, or people start to look for other jobs, you know? But I also think that there is a way to, from the upper management leadership side, to be able to communicate that to the team. So there is no parsing of why this is being kind of pressed upon. And a lot of preventative measures too. I think there's a lot of tools in place that create creative rail guards and guardrails, guardrails, so that the entire team can understand what the limit of what they're trying to make is, and trying to find those guardrails immediately, friends, as soon as humanly possible, because it will just make the whole process a little bit better. What it won't do is, again, it won't give you answers immediately, but what it will do is that we've decided we're making a platformer. We're not going to do anything else. We're staying in this lane. We're not going to be driven by what we saw on the award show, or now we saw the marathon trailer. We're going to make a first-person shooter. You're going to stay in your lane, stay super focused, and get the platformer done. You know, if you didn't do enough market research and you didn't do a lot of that stuff beforehand, and you realize you're going to be running into basically a perfect storm of failures, I mean, that is unfortunate and may be the only real reason to pivot the ship. If you really see that there's a shift happening, you need to adjust to the shift. But other than that, yeah, stay on course. It's my advice typically. But anyway, all right, I'm gonna stop painting now. This was more than 10 minutes. Speaking of mismanagement, see, evidence here that I too am not immune to this, and I embrace that. I think it actually had less to do with the painting. It's more of me talking. That I know I do too much of. Yeah, I appreciate you guys as always. Thanks for all the great comments and DMs and sharing of my work and talking with others. I've been getting a lot of that. It's been wonderful to see that. Again, very inspiring. Very happy to help grow this community back to this vibrant, optimistic group of people that try to help each other, not set the world on fire. It's nice. It's nice to kind of be amongst that company. Again, I don't discount the people who are trying to bring awareness to a lot of the challenges that we as a species are facing, but there's got to be the getaways. People where you go and listen, they help you draw and paint and stay motivated. Hopefully this video did that for you guys. If you've been drawing and painting with me, sick. If you listen to this entire video, awesome. I appreciate you. Send me some, I'm trying to think of a word you guys could put in the comments so I know that you listened to the entire video. Send me the phrase, just so people are confused. No, I don't want to do that actually. I was going to say crunch is amazing. That way people are like, what? This whole video is not about that. It's like, well, clearly you didn't listen to the whole video. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe bunnies are tight. That'd be nice. Bunnies are tight, because the bunny didn't come out until like later in the video anyway. So yeah, bunnies are tight. So let me know you listen to the entire video. And share and like. If you want to support me in these videos, those are great. And also maybe go buy some of my tutorials too. Appreciate it. Either way, I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.